Philippines. The Philippines, officially the Republic of the Philippines, is an archipelagic country in Southeast Asia. In the Western Pacific Ocean, it consists of 7,641 islands, with a total area of roughly 300,000 square kilometers, which are broadly categorized in three main geographical divisions from north to south: Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. With a population of over 110 million, it is the world's 12th most populous country. The Philippines is bounded by the South China Sea to the west, the Philippine Sea to the east, and the Celebes Sea to the south. It shares maritime borders with Taiwan to the north, Japan to the northeast, Palau to the east and southeast, Indonesia to the south, Malaysia to the southwest, Vietnam to the west, and China to the northwest. It has diverse ethnicities and a rich culture. Manila is the country's capital, and its most populated city is Quezon City. Both are within Metro Manila. Negritos, the archipelago's earliest inhabitants, were followed by waves of Austronesian peoples. The adoption of animism, Hinduism with Buddhist influence, and Islam established island kingdoms. Extensive overseas trade with neighbors such as the late Tang or Song Empire brought Chinese people to the archipelago as well, which would also gradually settle in and intermix over the centuries. The arrival of the explorer Ferdinand Magellan marked the beginning of Spanish colonization. In 1543, Spanish explorer Ruy López de Villalobos named the archipelago Las Islas Filipinas in honor of King Philip II of Castile. Catholicism became the dominant religion, and Manila became the western hub of trans-Pacific trade. Hispanic immigrants from Latin America and Iberia would also selectively colonize. The Philippine Revolution began in 1896 and became entwined with the 1898 Spanish-American War. Spain ceded the territory to the United States, and Filipino revolutionaries declared the First Philippine Republic. The ensuing Philippine-American War ended with the United States controlling the territory until the Japanese invasion of the islands during World War II. After the United States retook the Philippines from the Japanese, the Philippines became independent in 1946. Since then, the country notably experienced a period of martial law from 1972 to 1981 under the dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos and his subsequent overthrow by the People Power Revolution in 1986. Since returning to democracy, the Constitution of the Fifth Republic was enacted in 1987, and the country has been governed as a unitary presidential republic. However, the country continues to struggle with issues such as inequality and endemic corruption. The Philippines is an emerging market and a developing and newly industrialized country whose economy is transitioning from being agricultural to service and manufacturing-centered. Its location as an island country on the Pacific Ring of Fire and close to the equator makes it prone to earthquakes and typhoons. The Philippines has a variety of natural resources and a globally significant level of biodiversity. The country is part of multiple international organizations and forums. Etymology. During his 1542 expedition, Spanish explorer Ruy López de Villalobos named the islands of Leyte and Samar, Filipinas, after the Prince of Asturias, later Philip II of Castile. Eventually, the name Las Islas Filipinas would be used for the archipelago's Spanish possessions. Other names such as Islas del Poniente Western Islands, Islas del Oriente Eastern Islands, Ferdinand Magellan's name, and San Lazaro Islands of St. Lazarus were used by the Spanish to refer to islands in the region before Spanish rule was established. During the Philippine Revolution, the Malolos Congress proclaimed it the Republica Filipina, the Philippine Republic. American colonial authorities referred to the country as the Philippine Islands, a translation of the Spanish name. The United States began changing its nomenclature from the Philippine Islands to the Philippines in the Philippine Autonomy Act and the Jones Law. The official title Republic of the Philippines was included in the 1935 Constitution as the name of the future independent state and in all succeeding constitutional revisions. Prehistory pre-900. There is evidence of early hominins living in what is now the Philippines as early as 709,000 years ago. Bones from Palau Cave potentially represent an otherwise unknown species, Homo luzonensis, who lived 50,000 to 67,000 years ago. The oldest modern human remains on the islands are from the Taban Caves of Palawan, U/TH dated to 47,000 plus, or -11 to 10,000 years ago. Taban man is presumably a Negrito. Among the archipelago's earliest inhabitants descended from the first human migrations out of Africa via the coastal route along southern Asia to the now sunken landmasses of Sundaland and Sahul. The first Austronesians reached the Philippines from Taiwan around 2200 BC, settling the Baton's Islands, where they built stone fortresses known as Ijangs and northern Luzon. Jade artifacts have been dated to 2000 BC, with Linglinggo jade items made in Luzon with raw materials from Taiwan. By 1000 BC, the inhabitants of the archipelago had developed into 4 societies: hunter-gatherer tribes, warrior societies, highland plutocracies, and port principalities. Early states, 900 to 1565. The earliest known surviving written record in the Philippines is the 900 AD Laguna copperplate inscription, which was written in Old Malay using the early Kawi script. By the 14th century, several large coastal settlements emerged as trading centers and became the focus of societal changes. Some polities had exchanges with other states throughout Asia. Trade with China began during the late Tang dynasty and expanded during the Song dynasty. Throughout the second millennium AD, some polities were part of the tributary system of China. With extensive trade and diplomacy, this brought southern Chinese merchants and migrants from southern Fujian, who would gradually settle and intermix in the Philippines. Indian cultural traits such as linguistic terms and religious practices began to spread in the Philippines during the 14th century via the Indianized Hindu Majapahit Empire. By the 15th century, Islam was established in the Sulu archipelago and spread from there. Polities founded in the Philippines between the 10th and 16th centuries include Manila, Tonda, Namayan, Pangasinan, Caboloan, Cebu, Butuan, Maguindanao, Lanao, Sulu, and Mai. The early polities typically had a 3-tier social structure: nobility, freemen, and dependent debtor bondsmen. Among the nobility were leaders known as datus, who were responsible for ruling autonomous groups, barangays or dulahan. When the barangays banded together to form a larger settlement or a geographically looser alliance, their more esteemed members would be recognized as a paramount datu, raja, or sultan, and would rule the community. Population density is thought to have been low during the 14th to 16th centuries due to the frequency of typhoons and the Philippines' location on the Pacific Ring of Fire. Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan arrived in 1521, claimed the islands for Spain, and was killed by Lapu-Lapu's men in the Battle of Mactan. Spanish and American colonial rule, 1565 to 1934. Unification and colonization by the Crown of Castile began when Spanish explorer Miguel López de Legazpi arrived from New Spain in 1565. Many Filipinos were brought to New Spain as slaves and forced crew, whereas many Latin Americans were brought to the Philippines as soldiers and colonists. The Philippines hosts the only Latin American established districts in Asia. Spanish Manila became the capital of the Captaincy General of the Philippines and the Spanish East Indies in 1571, Spanish territories in Asia and the Pacific. The Spanish invaded local states using the principle of divide and conquer, bringing most of what is the present-day Philippines under one unified administration. Disparate barangays were deliberately consolidated into towns, where Catholic missionaries could more easily convert their inhabitants to Christianity, which was initially syncretist. Christianization by the Spanish friars occurred mostly across the settled lowlands over the course of time. From 1565 to 1821, the Philippines was governed as a territory of the Mexico City-based Viceroyalty of New Spain. It was then administered from Madrid after the Mexican War of Independence. Manila became the western hub of trans-Pacific trade by Manila galleons built in Baikal and Cavite. During its rule, Spain nearly bankrupted its treasury, quelling indigenous revolts and defending against external military attacks, including Moro piracy, a 17th-century war against the Dutch, 18th-century British occupation of Manila, and conflict with Muslims in the south. Administration of the Philippines was considered a drain on the economy of New Spain, and abandoning it or trading it for other territory was debated. This course of action was opposed because of the island's economic potential, security, and the desire to continue religious conversion in the region. The colony survived on an annual subsidy from the Spanish crown averaging 250,000 pesos, usually paid as 75 tons of silver bullion from the Americas. British forces occupied Manila from 1762 to 1764 during the 7 Years' War, and Spanish rule was restored with the 1763 Treaty of Paris. The Spanish considered their war with the Muslims in Southeast Asia an extension of the Reconquista. The Spanish-Moro conflict lasted for several hundred years. Spain conquered portions of Mindanao and Jolo during the last quarter of the 19th century, and the Muslim Moro in the Sultanate of Sulu acknowledged Spanish sovereignty. Philippine ports opened to world trade during the 19th century, and Filipino society began to change. Social identity changed, with the term Filipino encompassing all residents of the archipelago instead of solely referring to Spaniards born in the Philippines. Revolutionary sentiment grew in 1872 after 200 locally recruited colonial troops and laborers alongside 3 activist Catholic priests were executed on questionable grounds. This inspired the propaganda movement, organized by Marcelo H. del Pilar, José Rizal, Graciano López Gina, and Mariano Ponce, which advocated political reform in the Philippines. Rizal was executed on December 30, 1896, for rebellion, and his death radicalized many who had been loyal to Spain. Attempts at reform met with resistance. Andrés Bonifacio founded the Katipunan Secret Society, which sought independence from Spain through armed revolt. In 1892, the Katipunan Cry of Pugadlan began the Philippine Revolution in 1896. Internal disputes led to the Tigueros Convention, at which Bonifacio lost his position and Emilio Aguinaldo was elected the new leader of the revolution. The 1897 Pact of Bayagnabato resulted in the Hong Kong junta government in exile. The Spanish-American War began the following year and reached the Philippines. Aguinaldo returned, resumed the revolution, and declared independence from Spain on June 12, 1898. In December 1898, the islands were ceded by Spain to the United States with Puerto Rico and Guam after the Spanish-American War. Spain ruled the Philippines for 333 years. The First Philippine Republic was promulgated on January 21, 1899. Lack of recognition by the United States led to an outbreak of hostilities that, after refusal by the U.S. on-scene military commander of a ceasefire proposal and a declaration of war by the nascent republic, escalated into the Philippine-American War. The war resulted in the deaths of 250,000 to 1 million civilians, primarily due to famine and disease. Many Filipinos were transported by the Americans to concentration camps, where thousands died. After the fall of the First Philippine Republic in 1902, an American civilian government was established with the Philippine Organic Act. American forces continued to secure and extend their control of the islands, suppressing an attempted extension of the Philippine Republic, securing the Sultanate of Sulu, establishing control of interior mountainous areas which had resisted Spanish conquest, and encouraging large-scale resettlement of Christians in once predominantly Muslim Mindanao. Commonwealth and World War II, 1935 to 1946. Cultural developments in the Philippines strengthened a national identity, and Tagalog began to take precedence over other local languages. Governmental functions were gradually given to Filipinos by the Taft Commission. The 1934 Tidings McDuffie Act granted a 10-year transition to independence through the creation of the Commonwealth of the Philippines the following year, with Manuel Quezon president and Sergio Osmeña vice president. Quezon's priorities were defense, social justice, inequality, economic diversification, and national character. Filipino, a standardized variety of Tagalog, became the national language. Women's suffrage was introduced, and land reform was considered. The introduction of women's suffrage during the Commonwealth period, 1935 to 1946, signifies a progressive step towards gender equality in the Philippines. This gave women the right to vote and participate in the country's political processes. The Empire of Japan invaded the Philippines in December 1941 during World War II, and the Second Philippine Republic was established as a puppet state governed by Jose P. Laurel. Beginning in 1942, the Japanese occupation of the Philippines was opposed by large-scale underground guerrilla activity. Atrocities and war crimes were committed during the war, including the Bataan Death March and the Manila Massacre. The Philippine resistance and Allied troops defeated the Japanese in 1944 and 1945. Over 1 million Filipinos were estimated to have died by the end of the war. On October 11, 1945, the Philippines became a founding member of the United Nations. On July 4, 1946, during the presidency of Manuel Roxas, the country's independence was recognized by the United States with the Treaty of Manila. Independence, 1946, present. Efforts at post-war reconstruction and ending the Hagbalahap Rebellion succeeded during Ramon Magsaysay's presidency, but sporadic communist insurgency continued to flare up long afterward. Under Magsaysay's successor, Carlos P. Garcia, the government initiated a Filipino-first policy which promoted Filipino-owned businesses. Succeeding Garcia, Diosdado Macapagal moved Independence Day from July 4th to June 12th, the date of Emilio Aguinaldo's declaration, and pursued a claim on eastern North Borneo. In 1965, Macapagal lost the presidential election to Ferdinand Marcos. Early in his presidency, Marcos began infrastructure projects funded mostly by foreign loans. This improved the economy and contributed to his re-election in 1969. Near the end of his last constitutionally permitted term, Marcos declared martial law on September 21, 1972, using the specter of communism, and began to rule by decree. The period was characterized by political repression, censorship, and human rights violations. Monopolies controlled by Marcos's cronies were established in key industries, including logging and broadcasting. A sugar monopoly led to a famine on the island of Negros. With his wife, Imelda, Marcos was accused of corruption and embezzling billions of dollars of public funds. Marcos's heavy borrowing early in his presidency resulted in economic crashes, exacerbated by an early 1980s recession where the economy contracted by 7.3% annually in 1984 and 1985. On August 21, 1983, opposition leader Benigno Aquino Jr., Marcos's chief rival, was assassinated on the tarmac at Manila International Airport. Marcos called a snap presidential election in 1986, which proclaimed him the winner, but the results were widely regarded as fraudulent. The resulting protests led to the People Power Revolution, which forced Marcos and his allies to flee to Hawaii. Aquino's widow, Corazon, was installed as president and a new constitution was promulgated. The return of democracy and government reforms, which began in 1986, were hampered by national debt, government corruption, and coup attempts. A communist insurgency and military conflict with Moro separatists persisted. The administration also faced a series of disasters, including the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in June 1991. Aquino was succeeded by Fidel V. Ramos, who liberalized the national economy with privatization and deregulation. Ramos's economic gains were overshadowed by the onset of the 1997 Asian financial crisis. His successor, Joseph Estrada, prioritized public housing but faced corruption allegations which led to his overthrow by the 2001 EDSA revolution and the succession of Vice President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo on January 20, 2001. Arroyo's 9-year administration was marked by economic growth, but was tainted by corruption and political scandals, including electoral fraud allegations during the 2004 presidential election. Economic growth continued during Benigno Aquino III's administration, which advocated good governance and transparency. Aquino III signed a peace agreement with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, MILF, resulting in the Bangsamoro Organic Law establishing an autonomous Bangsamoro region, but a shootout with MILF rebels in Mamisapano delayed passage of the law. Growing public frustration with post-EDSA governance led to the 2016 election of populist Rodrigo Duterte, whose presidency saw the decline of liberalism in the country, albeit largely retaining liberal economic policies. Among Duterte's priorities was aggressively increasing infrastructure spending to spur economic growth, the enactment of the Bangsamoro Organic Law, an intensified crackdown on crime and communist insurgencies, and an anti-drug campaign that reduced drug proliferation, but that has also led to extrajudicial killings. In early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic reached the Philippines, necessitating nationwide lockdowns that caused a brief but severe economic recession. Under a promise of continuing Duterte's policies, Marcos's son, Bongbong Marcos, ran with Duterte's daughter, Sara, and won the 2022 election. Marcos's renewal of a pro-U.S. foreign policy, however, has been viewed as a reversal of Duterte's cordiality with China, and territorial disputes in the South China Sea have since escalated.